Welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Before we get going, we'd like to thank our listeners because we really appreciate all your comments on our YouTube videos. So please keep expressing your thoughts, like our videos, and share them with those that you think would be interested in our topics. Today, we are talking about the evolving landscape of political science in Georgia and the country's shifting geopolitical orientation. We'll explore the influence of Western international relations theories on Georgia's academic research and discuss whether the country is moving towards or away from its long-standing alignment with the West. So, to discuss that, today we have with us Nino Skvortsova, who is a doctoral candidate and researcher in media studies and regime transformation in the South Caucasus.
Hello, Nino. Welcome to the show.
Greetings to you and your listeners.
Kamarjoba, Nino.
Since this is your first time with us, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and the interests that have led you to explore political science, and also what drew you to your specific field of research?
First of all, thank you. And I will start from my bachelor degree in Georgia, where I was studying social sciences and political science as well. And I was researching actually Georgian Relations at that time. And later I moved to study my master's degree in Russia, Moscow, at People's Friendship University. There I chose to study Russia's soft power in this region. And it expanded my interest to the region, especially Caucasus, because it was not well studied. Actually, the current situation was not well learned and researched. And when I moved to study the regional sciences, I chose Georgia, actually the transformation of political regime. I think it's quite interesting because we only have this liberal approach to regime transformation studies, and it dominates the academic discourse. So I choose to elaborate something that will be different and give us something else for we'll use some new food of thought.
Yeah,
I awarded those rankings of democratization because during the period of post-Soviet era, so-called post-Soviet era, they gave us hybrid regime status. And till now, Georgia, through all these years, Georgia remains a hybrid regime, which is weird, time goes and Georgia changes, but still hybrid regime, which is quite interesting. And you have questions, why? Because it's more democratized than it was before, and we don't kill people in the streets anymore. So my approach is quite different. It's more closer to school of realism, political realism, and I'm trying to elaborate on those conflicts within society and how those conflicts affected our institutional building and our political power shifts in political elites, which led to the regime transformation from Shwanat to Saakashvili and later to Georgian Dream. And I can tell that changes are quite huge. First of all those regimes existed within democratic political system, but they had their unique features.
In your recent paper, Political Science in Georgia, Epistemology and Determinants, which you co-authored with Dr. Arshil Sikharulidze, who is also a guest and friend of our podcast, you discuss the state of political science as a field of study in Georgia. You know the heavy influence of Western theories such as liberalism, neoliberalism, institutional liberalism, etc., and the role of external actors like the US and the EU in shaping academia in post-Soviet Georgia. The paper also points out the fact that the heavy reliance of Georgian scholars in this field on Western funding and other forms of influence may have influenced the situation on the ground significantly. It was fascinating for me to see this phenomenon, especially in graph form in your paper, which many of us have, of course, observed, but it's nice to see it documented and given an academic treatment.
First of all, I will answer to the question about the paper. Thank you for your high appreciation of the paper. We do it for you, for the readers. The situation was put so we could see the situation in the society, Georgian society, which was divided, so say, by people who are pro-Western and who are pro-Georgian. There's no huge number of people who are pro-Russian because they call those people who are pro-Georgian pro-Russians, which is strange for me. They want to be independent, that's it. So our political elite, mostly educated in the West, and our academic elite as well was educated in the West. And that's not the only reason. To begin with, the political theory has emerged, and actually it emerged in the West. I would not say it's Greek because it's too ancient for us. I would say 19th century and beginning of 20th century, because it was a time when the theories were booming and coming to life and affecting us. And this all comes from the Great Century, where two big wars, world wars, happened. So it all was Western made. It was made in West. It's like made in China now. What used to be made in West alone. And it's natural that they affect our lives and our minds because it's a product and they sell it very well. They know how to sell their theories. Let's speak of the soft power. It's not something extraordinary. It's quite simple. The soft power. What is the soft power? What's the smart power? What's the essence of it? Actually, it's just influence you can have with money and strategies without using your weapons. So it's like PR or propaganda. But they say it's not propaganda, it's different, which is a lie, of course. If you don't advertise something, people won't know it, and your soft power won't work. So strategy, they used to popularize their country, their culture, their language, the political system is propaganda. It's actually a strategy to sell something to the outer audience. And the concept of soft power is also Western, and it dominated the discourse since 90s. And till now, people are obsessed with it. Also, it's a nonsense. In the current world where we have wars, where power matters the most, as they speak of soft power. Now they have sharp power, where you combine your military powers with your smart power, and it's already sharp power. Well, you see how theories are made. They are not really extraordinary.
I think we always say that Russia always defaults to using hard power, whereas the West is much more adept at using soft power. I always wanted to know why is it that way, and why doesn't Russia rely more on its history, its common history with all these countries? Any thoughts on essentially the Russian component of soft power?
I wouldn't say that Americans don't use hard power. They actually do it. When they killed Qasem Soleimani of Iran, they do use drones and rockets. So it's not soft power. They can't use soft power in countries that don't like America. And Russia is the same. It can't use soft power where it's not liked, not welcome. And during the independence of the South Caucasus republics, we had stronger powers in our region competing for the influence. Turkey was trying to expand influence, Iran, European Union. I would say even Britain, a part of the European Union, because it's petroleum, they need it from the Azerbaijan, and America for the geopolitical strategy. And they all work here, and Russia alone couldn't do anything because the history was written differently. You know, the historiography is changing when the powers are changing in the country. When you change the government, they write new history books. When I was studying history at school, I was taught that Russia killed our people just cruelly, with no regret. They were treating us like no humans. And what would you think if you are Georgian growing up in the country and hearing these stories? Of course, you would hate them. And also, power can help you to communicate with these people. And soft power is not something like magical powder that will help you to fix all your problems in foreign policy. It's just a concept to make something beautiful and sound well. But soft power doesn't work without hard power if you don't have it. France had the highest level of soft power, but they used military power in Libya. They used their military in the former colonies. So it's complicated. You can't say that Russia only relies on hard power. Mostly it's true, because they disbelieve in soft power recently after Ukraine. Because when you, as one political scientist in Russia put it, it's easier to use tanks than to work with soft power. And it's more effective. And it works quicker, when tanks come to your country. But Russia does use soft power in Central Asia. They don't use military powers. They try to use soft power in Africa, in Asia, and with China. They don't use military power. So it works where it works, and where it does not, then comes some sanctions, military power, or anything, whatever comes to their mind. That's politics, and every tool is useful when you can reach your goal. Same for America and any great power.
Let me just jump directly to the paper. You essentially surveyed all of the academic literature over the past, 4 or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, published in Georgia. And you found that, for instance, 78.6% of all the published papers utilize liberal theories in their papers, and 11% classical realism, and the rest, we don't even need to mention. So it seems like liberal theories are the heaviest component of this. First of all, let me ask, about your methodology. How did you get access to all these papers, and are you sure that you were able to cover everything that was published in Georgia?
I don't think we have covered everything because not all papers are available. Because some are locked, and you just see them on the website with their name, but we didn't use them because we could not read. So we only choose papers of the authors of those universities, those researchers at the universities, whose papers are available. But it was enough, quite enough, to make some analysis and to see the situation, to perceive it better. We all knew it because it was obvious, but you need some data to see the progress or how it degrades later. So we plan to elaborate on it later with Archil Sikharulidze, because we want to make some ranking of academic researches related to their approaches to and the theories they use, because it will let us explain, to be helpful to explain later how our intellectual elite changed their approaches in researching the current situation or the past, or in forecasting the future, because now they all, mostly 70% plus, they view European Union as some salvation to our country, which is divided, which is separated, and so to say, thrown away to the wastelands of history. And they are actually saddened by the fact that EU stops the integration of Georgia. Academic field is full of people who prefer their feelings to the facts that are on the ground. They miss facts. They prefer their feelings and what they like to what is before them, or the real situation. They ignore reality just to perceive their dreams.
Right.
They call it Georgian Dream, but it's actually their European dream.
Asper and I frequently lament that Armenians sit in the middle of Yerevan, envisioning themselves to be in Paris or some other European capital. Meanwhile, much closer to us than Paris, we have Damascus, we have Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine. This cultural perception may have some historic roots because many Armenian thinkers in the previous 2 centuries were educated in the West and inspired by Western thinkers. However, cultural perspectives aside, your paper also talks about the role of funding. This is interesting for me, and I'd like to know how much financial dependency through grants, travel opportunities, research opportunities, and all other forms of non-monetary influence impact this chart. How does funding impact academic freedom and diversity of research topics in Georgia?
I have not worked as a researcher in Georgia, but from what I see and what we could find out during our research, most of the scientists, political scientists, they are dependent on European and American grants because Georgian government, as well it was with the NGO segment, NGOs, they didn't care about this sphere. They gave it up to America, to Europe, and to the position powers. Same with the youth. I will explain it this way. We have seen everything in the streets, what happened when our ruling party tried to promote the bill about the foreign agents registration last year. We have seen the youth in the streets and the rhetoric from West. We could hear it, that they call it Russian law and everything. So Georgian Dream could see the risks that NGOs bear for the ruling party because they are involved in politics. And now when they adopt the law this year, they adopted it. They try to create the database, who finances them, where this money goes, how they spend it, on what they spend it, and do they finance the political parties or activities. And we all knew it, citizens know it, but you need to see it with your eyes. Like you open the database, you see it. And explains the parallel because it's quite interconnected, because academics also are financed by the European Union and America. The same thing works here because they're financed from the West. And I think the government will have to do something with it. Or they have to issue grants for the scientists, but those researchers have to be independent because if they are pro-government, then there is no use in research, They should work as forecasters of the political situation or some economic changes or reforms. You need to build think tanks in Georgia, but they don't do it. They don't care about it. That's the problem of our political party and opposition as well, because they don't care about such things. They want to use NGOs and academic sector as tools for their political gain and fights to get power. And that's why when we got the data on researchers, most of them are actually supporters of the opposition forces. Most of them were members, used to be members of the opposition party, National Movement, United National Movement, and others used to work at NGOs that were supporting United National Movement. So it's quite interconnected. It's a network, and you can't escape it. If you speak about NGOs, you have to speak about academic sector because they are all together.
Another methodology question. I was looking at the number of universities that have published papers. Do all of these universities contribute a significant amount of papers to your study? And also, what can you tell us about the difference between public and private universities in Georgia in terms of I don't know if you went into these details in your study, but for instance, could the university where the academic is associated with contribute to the left versus right leaning of their papers?
Yes, we have a lot of universities. Some are state universities and some are private, mostly private. Some are half and half, like mine, Caucasus International University. It was half state and half private. I would say that, of course, universities affect how researchers work, but, some researchers go there where they can do things they want to do, and they don't work where they can't write things they are liable to write. So state universities are mostly liable to use liberal theories because we have the state policy. We have to integrate into EU and NATO. So what's the questions about it? And those scholars who work now there were part of the political party, and they moved to Ilia State University. Most of them are there, working there now. Former members of United National Movement. They are working at this university. Some of them moved to private universities. And of course, they grew up, the young researchers, they grew up during Misha Saakashvili's presidency. Mikhail Saakashvili's presidency, sorry.
It's okay. We can call him Misha.
Yes, he is Eddie and Misha. We call them softly. Saakashvili did the right thing when he gave grants to the young people and sent them abroad to pursue studies. He gave them future, and it was the right move in the long run, because now those people, maybe they don't like Saakashvili, but they are grateful because he gave them something to live with. He gave them education. Yes, of course, he used state money, but no other party did it before or after him. So that's the thing, that nobody did it after him. And they are grateful. Maybe they don't like Saakashvili or his regime, but they actually prefer liberal democracy and market economy to the things that Georgian Dream is promoting now. And of course, they will be in a position. Maybe they won't be radical. They won't go on the barricades and throw Molotov cocktails at the police. But in the academia, in media, in social media, they will speak in the favor of the Western values, of course. And that was a very good move of Saakashvili. I won't praise him, but he did right things in his presidency. So I have to underline that. If you want to speak about methodology, I can tell that how we did it. We actually read everything that was written and figured out which theory was used there in the paper, because there are giveaway words and concepts that tell you which theory was used. Because when they do write in liberal theory, they focus on civic education, networks, and things like that. So we figured out, we had some classifications which we used to classify papers in groups, and that's how we did it, with our own heads and hands.
Is it difficult? Because sometimes you might have, you're essentially trying to put each paper in a bin. As I understand it, is it possible that a certain paper can use multiple theories, or you will always need to assign it to one theory? And is it difficult to then decide, how do you adjudicate if certain words were used too much, or do you actually read the whole paper and try to reason about, what is the main dominant theory in that paper?
We actually had this dilemma, and we had to read through the whole paper. And I can tell that when I was reading papers, I had to figure out two approaches. Actually, they were liberal and neoliberal. And you can't mix in your paper realism and liberalism because they are opposite. You can't mix them as theories. You can take some tools from it, but when it comes to theory, you use only one, like realism or neorealism.
Makes sense.
So scientists who write papers, they can't mix theories unless they're studying all those in their paper, like differences or different approaches. So unless they're comparing them, they can use each of them. But when you're writing a paper, you can't use different ones.
Nino, it was interesting to hear your thoughts about Saakashvili's investments in education. Just as an aside, under Sargsyan's leadership, the Lewis Foundation was established in Armenia, but it seems to be of a much smaller scale than what you're describing in Georgia. But going back to the reasons for the liberal tilt in the academic papers, which you noticed, is there another explanation for it besides funding?
I think funding goes hand in hand with personal preferences, because scientists usually, I can say for myself, that when we write papers or do researches, we plan our agenda and we pick the theory that we think is the most suitable for it. And when I was writing about soft power, I did a grave mistake. I used liberal theory and I had to praise it, writing about Russia and praising Russian soft power, which was in a bad shape. And I had to somehow praise it at certain moments and sometimes to criticize it. But later I figured out I would be better. It would be better if I have used a realistic approach because it would give more essence of facts and rather than just praising the systematic approaches of the institutions, how good they work and how they cooperate. I think that in the world where we speak about wars, liberal approach didn't work.
Can you give an example of that? Because it's sort of maybe a little bit hard to understand what is the difference between the liberal approach.
I was actually explaining just war in Georgia, and I had hard time writing about it because everything that happened was derived from Russia's realistic approach to the situation, Georgia integrating into NATO or becoming the location for NATO's bases in Caucasus. That was a realistic approach of Russian policy, and I used the liberal approach to write about this. It was nonsense for me, and I came to it later, and I think it was my mistake. And these people actually speak of Abkhazia and Ossetia in their papers. I remember it quite well because I was reading it. And they use a liberal approach of returning those lands into Georgian state, which is also strange for me because it didn't work for 30 years. Why would it change now? You have to be realistic about the situation and accept some facts and work on what you have on the ground. But you again build some institutions to cooperate, to speak to someone in Geneva, and it's useless because they don't want to talk to you because you are not realistic about the situation, about their needs, their wants. We prefer to see Russia as aggressor, but we ignore the fact that Abkhazians and Ossetians also had some questions about their identity, their history, and we ignore everything with our liberal approach to our state integrity.
Hovig, let's just take a moment here. We'd like to remind everyone to go to our donate page, podcasts.groong.org/donate, and consider buying us a coffee or two, or better yet, become a sustaining member of Groong and give monthly.
We like to believe that we are unique in the category of Armenian podcasts. We digest Armenian news weekly and bring you interesting discussions relevant to it. We've always been a labor of love, and we're not only nonprofit, but we're also non-budget. Just 2 to 3 friends who have committed our lives, time, and effort to understand the world around Armenians and sharing that understanding with you.
Of course, we will continue our work as we always have, but we are stronger with you than without you. Your support will help us expand our reach to more people who are interested in Armenian news and affairs around the world.
So please visit our donate page, podcasts.groong.org/donate, and consider supporting us. Thank you in advance. We appreciate your listening to us and take that trust and your support very seriously.
Thank you. Hovig, you mentioned a little bit earlier how a portion of Armenian intelligentsia in the 19th century and also at the start of the 20th century were educated in Europe, for example, France, the Sorbonne University, and then Germany. And they came home with strong ideas of Renaissance, democracy, socialism, and those things have had long-lasting effects on Armenian identity. So I want to ask Nino, how does Western influence in Georgian academia impact the national identity of ordinary Georgians today?
It's quite interesting. We have to elaborate some social research on it. Some sociology is needed here. I think Georgians are actually fed the idea that Europe is our home and family through the civic education, school, some TV shows or news media, and universities. I don't think we really understand what is the price of being a part of this European family. Because if we understood it, I think things would have changed years before than as now. The situation that we see now is what had to happen years before, when we wrote that in our constitution about the European Union and NATO integration, because we had no idea what we are agreeing on. We are asked, you want European Union or you want Russia? I have questions to those people who ask me this. Okay, I want European Union, but what are the criteria to enter it? What I have to give up? And when you tell them that they have to give their part of their independence, you have to agree with Brussels, you have to agree with Paris, and you have to agree with Berlin. They tell you that, well, they are taking away my independence that I used to fight for. My ancestors fought for it. So they don't understand what was talked about for all these years. And I think that was a failure of education, and we just believed that it's some deity that would save us from all the evil that comes from the north, so speaking of Russia. And to continue the thing about European Union and Russia, it's quite strange when they ask me during the social research, I was asked a question. It was actually a social pulse. They asked me a question: do I prefer European Union or Russia? I asked them at once, why do you tell me Georgia is becoming part of Russia? Do you believe in it? Explain it to me. What are the facts that tell me that I'm becoming part of Russia, a CIS region, or Eurasian Union? Tell me about it. They just ask you questions and you have to say this or no, nothing. I think it's primitive. They don't talk to you. They just propagate what they need. And you, as a citizen, and you are not into politics, you just watch news and get information. You digest it, but you don't understand how it works. And it's not education. It's nothing. I mean, you are just fooled and told what to do. It's not democracy, I think. Democracy should be when citizens are informated. Mm-hmm. They're not lied to. So I don't see how they tell me that I'm going to join the European Union and build democracy when they tell me lies.
Has it always been that there's been this, what do you call it, like this paradigm of EU or Europe versus Russia? Did you consider yourselves, from an identity perspective, a European culture? Or, for example, if we were to go back 10 centuries and we have Georgia in the 10th century, that's going far too far back. But because I've, you know what, it's a fictitious question to ask. Are you a European culture or a Russian culture? I mean, here in the middle of America, every Christmas time or the holiday time, we're listening to Swan Lake and other Russian operas and pieces from Tchaikovsky and everything. So I've always grown up considering them a European culture. It's this political situation right now for the last whatever, since the fall of the Soviet Union, or maybe even the Soviet Union, that has given rise to this split in geopolitics. And we think that there's a cultural divide. I mean, I consider Russia essentially a European culture.
I think in the 10th century, Georgian kings didn't think themselves as European kings. They just had the military power and were expanding other territory. You remember that at those times, Georgia was trying to unify and fighting Turk Seljuks. And finally, it was unified by Bagrat III, and later it was expanded its influence in the Caucasus.
Our histories are deeply intertwined at that time.
Yes, and David Moshenebeli, he brought country together and made it stronger. It turned into empire, and Tamar Mepe made it stronger, his granddaughter. But the thing is that we are learning history now as if those kings and those queens, well, she was a king as well, sorry, to Georgians. She was king. They are teaching at school like those kings and even those liberals, so to say, liberal Ilya Georgievadze, believed that Georgia was part of Europe. It was our family. They are putting their writings or their doings this way. So it's interpretation of facts.
Mhm.
You can interpret facts as the way you like, because those are just facts and you have to study it deeply. But at school, you don't study anything deeply. You just listen to your teacher and answer whatever she tells you to do. And it goes on later at university. Those who are curious because they love their country, they want to be Georgians, they believe that they have rich history, rich culture. Of course, they study it, but they're few. It takes a lot of power, time, and money to learn such things, but they're a minority, and I don't see how our education could help Georgians understand realities that we are in the Caucasus region. Actually, we should use the opportunity of being the Central and South Caucasus. We are being a bridge between West and East. So that's our history, it's our destiny, and we should make the best of it. But whatever we are educated at school to believe that we are part of European family, and we have to sacrifice everything to become members of the family that is not accepting us. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
Become better with our neighbors and build our region together. But it has dawned only now on our government that there is a region, vast neighbor and rich neighbors we can collaborate with, and they change their foreign policy orientation a bit. Of course, they can say they don't want EU and NATO, but you can tell from their actions that they're trying to diversify their foreign policy and trying to talk with Iran, Armenia, and Central Asia countries, especially Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan.
Understood. So just to close the topic of your paper, and then we already are starting to talk about some politics, but I would love to see some comparative research across the Caucasus and maybe even the region in terms of using your methodology and trying to see, how universities in Armenia or how researchers in Armenia are presenting their topics. And for our listeners, I would strongly encourage you to read this paper. It's called Political Science in Georgia, Epistemology and Determinants.
Hovig, let me just interject that we have put the link in our show notes. So go to podcasts.groong.org/episode number, and then you'll find the links.
For the final thought on this specific part of the conversation on your paper, what can you leave the listeners with in terms of the key message or key conclusion in your paper, how you see your paper influencing policy, influencing how people think about research and how people consume this research?
I think the first thing we try to aim at is to inform people in academia and in Georgia. By the way, it was read by Americans, Iranians, and many other countries. So I think they will anticipate this idea and will try to do the same research in their countries. It will be interesting to see how Western narratives are spread among the academia in the world. That's the thing. That's what we aim at. We want to get the database from all countries possible, so we can look through tendencies, how it changes, whether it grows or becomes less. And I think that we should really build a network of researchers to bring more sense to this paper, because it was the start of the journey, so to say, of our longer research road. And in Georgia, maybe scholars will see it and they will think that there's too much disbalance and we should try some other approaches or come up with something new, because the world is changing. And when we say that we are a country of rich history, we are intellectuals, and we want to be independent, maybe we should try to elaborate on something new. We don't have to come up with any theory that is complicated. we should try to figure things out from our history, from what we have been through, and see which tools help us understand it better. I don't think that, for example, theories that came up during democratization in America or in Europe are quite useful for the study of democratization in the post-Soviet Union, which is the states that formed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They're quite different. We have different history. We have different ethnic minorities and groups, and we have different mentality from the Western societies. And when we just copy something and use it in our states, in our researches, in Georgia, in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, Iran, Turkey, I don't think that's the right approach, because it was part of globalization. But to deal with your problems within country, you have to come up with something that only you feel and know. Like, you know your people better. And you know their mentality, you know their psychology, and you should know how to study things that happen in our political life with our neighbors. And I believe that we can reach this goal. It's the main goal for us, to become intellectually independent.
Nino, recently we had a conversation with your colleague, Dr. Nicholas Bitsadze. That was episode 370 on our YouTube pages. The discussion centered on the potential shift in Georgia's political landscape, including tensions around aligning with Western institutions such as the EU and NATO. In the coming elections, in 2 weeks basically, there's a real possibility that we'll see Georgia shifting gears, or as the West likes to say, quote, pivoting away from the West, unquote, or turning eastwards. So how significant is this potential pivot away from the West, and what are the main drivers behind this shift? Also, how much of this shift is influenced by internal party politics inside Georgia versus external pressures from larger geopolitical players such as Russia and the EU?
I don't see any foreign policy shifts from European Union, because we still have it in our constitution. To begin with this, we have some changes, because as you can remember, after last elections, Georgian Dream had some problems with legitimacy from the West. Actually, I could tell that West is trying to change the regime within country via elections. The second democratic transit in Georgia, they needed it as a fresh air. But Georgian Dream won elections again. And I think they don't like it, because Georgian Dream been in power for 3 consecutive periods, and it's too much. Like 10 years. It's too much. And as I see it, for example, that they are unhappy with the democratic change, because they see the government in power for 3 periods, and they think that's a democratic backsliding, because they still win elections. And it doesn't sit in their heads and worldview that there is no real alternative to Georgian Dream. They are not the best party, but they are the best that we have. So they try to make up third political power. It was first Anadolidze, then Georgi Gaharia, former prime minister of Georgia, member of Georgian Dream, but it didn't work yet. So we are going to see Georgian Dream win elections, and the West is unhappy with it. I would underline that the critique of Georgian Dream began years before, but the criticizers were former ambassadors, NGO members, or activists, and foreign European Union's former politicians who now work at some education or international NGO structures. So they are built in some network, and they are unhappy about the situation in Georgia, because it used to be their work to democratize Georgia and make it a member of Western society and make it a tool in the process of democratization of post-Soviet space. Because you remember they used to say that Georgia is a beacon of democracy in this region. So yes, they are quite disappointed with the work they have done on the ground.
I mean, just a year ago, the EU essentially invited Georgia to become part of the, European Union, and I can't see how in 1 year, it's the same government, it's the same people. So it's interesting that in 1 year, the same government can be considered as ready to join the EU, and 1 year later, it can be considered as a, pro-Russian enemy of the West and so forth.
Yes, plus they have postponed the expansion of European Union till 2030, so the talks won't begin before that. So what's the point for the Georgian Dream to wait for that long and lose power by pushing the policies that are not popular in Georgian society just to please European Union bureaucrats, while they can build the economy, help business, help their citizens, and stay in power. I don't see why would any political power lose the support of their population just to gain the respect of the foreign politicians. That's nonsense. Saakashvili never did the same thing.
Nino, you touched upon the support from the population, so I wanted to ask this. I think that in Armenia historically as well, the incumbent stays in power, and the incumbent always has an advantage. When we're looking at polls recently in Georgia, some polls put the support for Georgian Dream at more than 50%, but they were argued to be essentially biased. But that doesn't tell me much in terms of, is this because of the incumbent effect? When we're talking about public opinion, what is the true, I guess, nature or pulse of the public opinion in terms of support of Georgian policies? Is it based on ideological reasons?
I think there are a few reasons. It's not ideological because Georgian Dream has no ideology. Just like any Georgian party in a position or in position. Only two parties I can differentiate that have some ideological ground. It's Girchi of Yagovichia and now conservative movement, which used to be Altinfo. They actually have some ideological grounds because some other ones are libertarians. They follow it till the end. They say that we have these ideas for you and we sell it. You can buy this. And they actually get paid by their voters, They are supported by their voters. As for movement of our conservatives, it was quite interesting because many accuse them of connections with Georgian Dream. I personally think that they used to have some connection because Georgian Dream just used them just to check the ground of conservative values. And now they took it when the conservative movement had to move in shades because they were persecuted and they had blocked their YouTube channels, so social media and television. So I think Georgian Dream used this idea of traditional values to build their campaign on it because Georgians, mostly are conservatives and they share traditional values and Christianity, of course. So
Nino, could you not say that Georgian Dream is a conservative party?
I don't think so because when they started, a few years ago, they were social democrats. Later, they were Democrats, liberals, and now they're conservatives. It's quite a lot of change. They're actually flip-flopping in politics. And I don't think they have any actual values, but they know what people need. They study it. As I know, they have their personal polls, which are closed for them. They use it as analytics within their party. And they know that people actually support this agenda, traditional values, no LGBTQ propaganda, no Western, Russian, or any influence in internal politics, and they push for it. And people buy it.
Yeah. So these elections are only 2 weeks away. How do you see the dynamics playing out? Could these elections signal any kind of a major shift in Georgia's foreign policy?
I think the major shift happened when Georgia signed strategic partnership with China. It was a huge move for us because before that, Georgia never looked in the direction of east, south, or north. And now we try to learn everywhere else except the West because we know what the West has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
We have to wait years to come because they told us you are not eligible to become members of the European Union for now, just like Turkey, which is waiting for so many years and is quite big and has some border with the European Union. Well, we don't have any. So if Turkey doesn't become a member of EU, we don't have a chance because there is no border. I don't see how they plan to trade goods or anything with a country that has no borders with a unity.
Right. Well, as you know, Armenia and Georgia also signed a strategic partnership earlier this year, but Hovig and I are still trying to figure out exactly what that means.
Well, I think there are strategic partnerships and there are strategic partnerships. Modern relations essentially between Georgia and Armenia, I want to cover that, are by and large cordial, but generally not particularly warm. I mean, we probably know the reasons for it. It has to do with, we had a Varam Dermatovosyan, a scholar from Armenia, talking about it in terms of historic, essentially, pulls and sways from different imperial forces and geopolitical forces, where the Caucasus maybe hasn't been a strong center of power or center of gravity in and of itself. But anything else you can add on why Armenia and Georgia are not close and are not so close as they should be because they're neighbors. And what can be done to improve this situation in terms of bringing more political awareness of each other's countries, more interaction between the two states?
We spoke of strategic partnership with China and Armenia at the same time. I would add that China, of course, is a global power. It's emerging global power, and it's quite different than Armenia, which is minor regional power and minor regional state. Of course, it's our neighbor, and many Armenians are citizens of Georgia, and we are all together in this, and we are all citizens of Georgia. But when it comes to politics, there are national interests and strategic interests which lie for us in Azerbaijan and Turkey because we export their energy resources to Europe, and we mostly are dependent on this cooperation with Turkish states, right? I guess that's the way to put it, because now that Central Asia is involved in Caucasus and is trying to export goods via Georgia and where our railroads to Europe and to the Middle East, we are more interested in good relations with Ankara and Baku, of course, than Yerevan. Besides the fact that we are really close, and many Armenians have joint families with Georgians, of course. So I think that things will change once Armenia and Azerbaijan and Turkey come to somewhat like a peace deal, because unless we have things figured out in the region on our own, I don't see how Georgia can do anything, because Georgia has no resources. We do export resources of our neighbors. The same way Armenia uses Georgian pass to Russia to export its goods to Russia, and we give it away for them. It's important because the other way, there's Iran alone, and Turkey and Azerbaijan are blocked for Armenia as a time. So I think that the level of relations between Tbilisi and Yerevan is just stable.
Yeah.
Just stable, which is good. It could get worse. Considering the events in the region, it could get worse, and some people could use the old traumas of Abkhazia, where they speak of Bagramian and how Armenians killed Georgians, which is some fairy tales made up. I don't know for real, but those things could be used against Armenia to break ties. But it did not pop up yet, so which is good.
Also, I want to add that Armenia and Armenian governments have been very careful about sensitivities around Armenians in Javakheti, for example. I think both Armenia and Georgia want to have as good relations together as possible, but it pains me to think, as an Armenian especially, that everyone is putting their hopes on some kind of a forced capitulation, or another name for the so-called peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan and Turkey that Aliyev is forcing. And I'm not singling you out, but essentially Armenia is on the chopping block and is getting the Versailles treatment. Yet the Armenian government itself is presenting this capitulation as a possibility to lead to peace. Even we are guilty of this because we say that, oh, well, when will peace come? We're all talking about this as if there will be peace, then there'll be better relations, but not understanding that the goal, for instance, there are no Armenians in Karabakh or Artsakh anymore. I mean, and by the definition of Turks and Azerbaijanis, their definition of peace means
no Armenians.
No Armenians. Let's not even go that far, but forget everything that, forget that we ethnically cleansed you, and, let's have peace. And if you do, then there is some vague promise that things will be better for everyone in the region. I'm just saying, how do I tell my friend who lost his mother, his brother, and his son in all of these 30 years to war, that now he has to sit down and just think about peace, and now we have to forget about our identity. We have to, when we look at Ararat, we have to feel a little bit guilty because we're looking at a Turkish mountain, not an Armenian one. I think that this aspect of regional sort of ideas about peace is being lost when foreigners talk about Armenia. And I have to tell you, if it was up to me, if I had to give up my identity as a survivor, as a grandson of survivors of genocide, as a descendant of Artsakhtsis, then I would rather there not be peace than for me to desecrate the memory of my ancestors. And so what I'm trying to say is peace can only be dignified. And dignified peace is only possible if all sides agree, namely Turkey and Azerbaijan. And we're so far away from it that I think it's difficult to say, when there'll be peace, then there'll be better relations. We are completely going in the opposite direction. We're going against, essentially erasing Armenian dignity, any dignity whatsoever that's been left. So I'm sorry to focus the end of our discussion on such a negative note, but I think definitely peace is much more elusive than people think. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I tend to think that political elite of Armenia could foresee the change in the region and how there was a shift in interest of Russia, Iran, and Turkey. There was a reason for it, and when elites don't respond adequately to the changing situations, people are devastated. The same happened to Georgia. You remember what happened to Georgia, and our elites were responsible for it. And because they couldn't understand what was the national interest at the time, they believed that someone would come and save them. I think it's very traumatic to be the descendant of someone who survived the genocide or was expelled from Artsakh, Karabakh, Artsakh, how they put it. And I think the trauma will remain with the generations because it's political memory of the nation of people. That's what makes them a nation. I don't see how they can change the situation because as a bargaining table, whatever Pashinyan puts, he's changing, switching sides on daily basis. I am reading through news, and sometimes he's speaking to Moscow, sometimes to Brussels, sometimes to Paris, and sometimes to Washington. And I think that's not the way to bargain with Azerbaijan. He could have done something earlier, maybe. It's easier to speak now from the perspective of today because you have seen everything that happened. Of course, it's easier for us, and it makes us feel guilty because we couldn't foresee back then. But elites are in power because they are responsible for their country, for their people. other way, they could give their power up and give it to someone who could deal with the things. But I don't see that happening. So I don't see how they will fix the situation because, to be honest, Azerbaijan has all the tools to push Yerevan into the deal they want to, just because they managed to win in that war, and they have strong ally. Turkey is quite strong ally, and that played for them.
And I think this underscores my argument that for regular Armenian public, a capitulation to Azerbaijan will not be a stable outcome, even when we talk about the relatives of all those 5,000 people who died in the 2020 war, the 150,000 refugees from Artsakh, and the large segment of the population who has been influenced by this war in one way or another. They will not suddenly forget everything that has happened.
Quite extra thing, which I thought I have on this situation as well. What I have noticed from communication with the Azerbaijanis and Armenians as well on this issue. I could tell that there is a deep-rooted hate towards each other, which is so boosted by state media in Azerbaijan or in Armenia as well. And the people actually can't stand one another. So actually usually happen to fight when they meet at some conference in Moscow or somewhere else. They happen to quarrel, fight, and deal with each other in uncommon manner. So I had to compare it with our communication with Abkhazians and Ossetians. It's quite different. Well, it depends on people, of course, but mostly we talk normally. Most of Georgians don't hate Abkhazians or Ossetians. We actually extrapolate our detest on Russia towards Russia, because we see Russia as an occupant and someone who took our territory away and killed our people. That's the difference between these conflicts. One more difference that I could say. And the reason Armenians couldn't stay in Karabakh, because there was deep-rooted hate, not only in political elite, but among people. They actually feared they would be killed, right? And that's the reason people couldn't stay.
They feared physical extermination.
A fear that based on real possibility, that's also important to state.
Yeah, sure. I could see how people just have seen each other once in a lifetime and they hate each other, which was strange for me because I couldn't hate anyone from Abkhazia, Ossetia, or Russia. It would be nonsense for me. Or anywhere, because we are human and we should coexist at some normal level. But whatever I could see between Azerbaijani and Armenians, that was something that shocked me indeed. So that's why I think that they couldn't coexist in Karabakh, Artsakh, and that's why had to flee, leave their homes, burn things to the ground, and just leave without anything, empty-handed.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. It's kind of a down note, but that's what it is. Thank you, Nino, for joining us today.
Thank you, Nino.
It was a pleasure.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on October 15, 2024. We've been talking with Nino Skvortsova, who is a scholar who researches media studies and regime transformation in the South Caucasus. Currently, she is a postgraduate PhD candidate researching regime transformation of Georgia. She has a master's in theory and history of international relations from RUDN, the People's Friendship University of Russia, and has also studied political sciences at the Caucasus International University in Tbilisi, Georgia. For more information on the participants of this episode, check out our show notes at podcast.groong.org/episode number. Please remember to support us. Go to our donate page at podcast.groong.org/donate and become a sustaining member of Groong and give monthly. Additionally, please let us know how we're doing by adding a comment on our YouTube videos. Your feedback is appreciated, and thank you in advance.